There have been angry reactions in South Africa over Donald Trump's confrontation with President Cyril Ramaphosa at the White House. The US leader falsely accused President Ramaphosa of failing to prevent the persecution of white farmers in South Africa and went on to make baseless claims that the farmers face a genocide. Mr. Trump showed videos and articles arguing that they backed up his allegations. President Ramaphosa denied there was any targeted violence against white farmers, saying that deaths are due to high levels of criminality in the country. He remained calm throughout the meeting. We asked people in Cape Town how they felt about the confrontation.
That was a very immature way to deal with the situation on Donald Trump's part. I feel like he should open himself up to hearing what Cyril Ramaphosa has to say about his own country.
I think he was ambushed, and I think he could have gone about it a better way, ethically and just overall. It just wasn't a good reflection, I say, of Trump nor America at this point.
I think it's very characteristic of Trump to treat Ramaphosa the way he did in that meeting, especially with his prior interaction with the Ukraine president and how he didn't really want him to speak or try to negotiate any kind of terms. Same thing he's doing with Ramaphosa right now.
To constantly interrupt him, to not allow him to give you the information that you're apparently asking for, that you're apparently here to receive, but you're not even listening. There's no real point to that. I think he was treated very disrespectfully, and I think while I might not agree with a lot of the things going on in our country, there's no reason for them to treat our president like that.
And let's get a reaction from South Africa now. I'm joined by Oscar van Heerden, expert in international relations at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflections. Welcome to DW, Oscar. Now, after the meeting, Ramaphosa played down this confrontation. What do people in South Africa think of their president's performance in the White House?
Look, there's mixed feelings at the moment. I think for the most part, people are happy about the fact that our president didn't descend into debates and arguments, something similar to what happened with President Zelensky, that he stuck to his decorum, that he addressed it with maturity and dignity, and didn't allow to be drawn in to these false allegations of white genocide and so forth. At all. So there's mixed feelings, but in the main, I think people are happy about the fact that President Ramaphosa came off as the statesman and he dealt with the matter in a very dignified manner.
Yeah, we have to be very clear here, and you already said it, Trump's claims of widespread persecution of white South Africans are false. How are his accusations and the alleged evidence he presented at that meeting viewed in South Africa?
Well, I think everyone knows that it is lies, it is falsehoods. Of course, as was indicated in the meeting, there are crimes that happened in South Africa. And of course, white South Africans are also at the receiving end of such criminal activity, but nothing that constitutes a targeted persecution of white South Africans. You know, I think, Nicole, we have to understand when you have an institution, an agency as big as the Central Intelligence Agency, billions of dollars spying on the whole world, and they are not able to tell their head of state, Donald Trump, that this is not true, then we need to ask ourselves, what is the reason for that? When you have a State Department, also billions of dollars under Marco Rubio, who also knows the truth. It's the country with the most embassies and consulates in the world, including in South Africa. They know that there's no white genocide happening in South Africa. There's no targeted farm killings. And so the question then, why is Donald Trump insisting with this narrative? There must be a political agenda behind it.
And let's look at that, because one of Trump's closest advisors is South African-born Elon Musk. And he has been, retweeting posts about an alleged white genocide for years, basically. So what do you think he has to do with this seemingly becoming a priority for the U.S. president?
Look, there's two theories that are going around. The one is around the fact that white Americans are in a panic about the fact that come 2050, they are no longer going to be the majority within America. Minorities like the Hispanics are going to be in the majority. And so there's this fear that they need to repopulate whites within North America. I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory. I think a more plausible theory is the second theory, which is that this is a tit for tat. America is very upset with South Africa and the South African government having taken Israel to the International Court of Justice for the crime of genocide in Gaza. And this is a cheap attempt at wanting to give an impression internationally that the very country with moral authority, such as South Africa, taking Israel to the ICJ, is now also being accused of genocide towards a segment of its population, and hence the expediting of the 49 refugees to arrive in Washington. It's all part of a choreographed way of wanting to embarrass and cast aspersions on the South Africans.
That was Oscar van Heerden. Thank you so much for sharing your view with us today.
Always a pleasure.
Well, Ebrahim Rasool served as South Africa's ambassador to the United States until he was expelled in March this year because of remarks he made about Donald Trump. Welcome to DW, Ambassador. What went through your mind when you saw yesterday's scenes at the Oval Office?
I must say it was a multiple deja vu, in the sense that that's exactly the kind of bluster and falsity that I think you encounter with a MAGA crowd in Washington, D.C., the inability to hear the facts, the standing by blatant falsehoods. And so I think that that's what the world has seen in relation to Donald Trump dealing with President Ramaphosa yesterday. So by and large, on the one hand, as you have shown in your insert, there is anger and disappointment at the way in which President Trump handled the meeting, but there is also admiration for the dignity, the unity, and the diversity of the South African delegation. And so when we couldn't get our words in, I think that the body language, the diversity, and the dignity of the South African delegation spoke volumes. And in that, we were able to say that those were false allegations and that there is a truth. That is not what Donald Trump had spoken yesterday.
So you think President Ramaphosa handled this well? He shouldn't have pushed back harder against Donald Trump's false claims?
I think pushing back harder could have risked a Zelensky moment in the White House. I think that certainly President Ramaphosa would have been armed with the fact that in the last 10 or 11 years, there were, unfortunately, 630 farm murders, not the thousands that is spoken about by Donald Trump, but that in the definition of farm murders, the President Ramaphosa could also, if given the chance, have said that they also include black victims of white farmers. For example, 2 women killed on a farm and then fed to the pigs to eat. In much the same way, a 6-year-old driven over for picking up an orange from the ground. In much the same way, a so-called drunk farm worker being dragged
so violence is a problem in South Africa.
Could have been said.
Okay. When you look at what Donald Trump has been doing over the last couple of months, fast-tracking South African refugees, this baseless talk of a white genocide, this baseless talk about land expropriation, his belligerent attitude yesterday, what do you think is behind his apparent beef with South Africa?
Look, I think that that any supremacism requires a group of victims. And so I think white South Africans have placed the very evidence that Donald Trump played yesterday in front of him. And so there is that. But I also think most importantly, it is South Africa's case in the International Court of Justice charging Israel with a genocide. I think, fortunately, South Africa stood its ground on those very fundamental values-based matters and had to endure the allegations on genocide of white South Africans and so forth. I think, ironically, if President Trump, by his definition of a genocide of 630 white South Africans, were to be called as a witness in the ICJ case, I think he would be the star witness for a genocide in Palestine.
Listen, you used the word supremacist there. You were kicked out of the United States a couple of months ago because of your comments about Donald Trump. You accused him of leading a supremacist organisation. I wonder if you, Ambassador, are part of the problem. This is clearly a US president who holds a grudge.
I think, and the grudge is not baseless. I think that a grudge that expels, deports black and brown from the United States, but imports white refugees on the flimsiest basis, I think says a lot. And so maybe that imagery should speak for itself.
Good talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Former South African ambassador to the United States, Ebrahim Rasool. Thank you.